Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker may be small in size, but he is huge in stature, intelligence, experience, and brilliance. Camille tell me to say that. He too is an outstanding contributor in the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. The UNC is afraid of him because he has a plaster for every cut. He has demonstrated an extraordinary high competence in finance and the economy, as well as parliamentary practice and duties. His vast experience in politics covers decades of outstanding service in the parliament and the movement. His famous words and political war cry is "Come outside, come outside." Welcome inside tonight, the Vice Chairman of the People's National Movement and Minister of Finance, the one and only, the Honorable Colm Imbert.
Thank you, Daniel. Before I greet the Prime Minister and political leader, what is with all you? A small, have a plaster for every cut. Who is that? I don't say anything about all you. Anyway, Dr. the Honorable Keith Christopher Rowley, Prime Minister of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, and Member of Parliament for Diego Martin West. Our absent colleague, Darrell Smith, who is doing government business in Jamaica. The Minister of Planning and Development, the Honorable Camille Robinson Regis, and Member of Parliament for Aruca Maloney. Other members of the head table, including the Vice Chairman of the Diego Martin Corporation, Catherine Mendez, my ministerial colleagues, my numerous ministerial colleagues, other members of the leadership of the party, the Chairman Franklin Can, deputy political leaders, constituents of Diego Martin West, Central, and of course Northeast. Make some noise. Members of the media, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Now let's get on to some serious business. It is necessary for me at this juncture, halfway through our term, because make no mistake about it, we are halfway through our term. This month is 2.5 years since we won the general election in 2015 under the leadership of Dr. Keith Rowley. Now let's give a round of applause for that victory. But we are now dead in the middle of our 5-year term. And it is necessary to recap and to remember and to remind the general public and those in opposition to us as to what we inherited when we came into government. And let me give you an understanding of what we met. When we left office in 2010, the national expenditure, the budget, was somewhere in the vicinity of $46 billion a year. However, the government that succeeded us immediately started to increase expenditure. They went from 46 billion in 2010 to 53 billion in 2011 to 58 billion in 2012 to 63 billion in 2013-2014 and 60 billion in 2015. So what they did, they boosted expenditure from 46 billion to 63 billion dollars. But revenue was not keeping pace with expenditure. In 2015, revenue was only $52 billion. Yet they were spending $63 billion. And the way they financed the difference, they did it in many different ways. When we left office in 2010, we left the government's bank account, the current account of the government at the central bank. The government has one main current account, like any bank account, at the central bank. We left that current account in credit. There was $6 billion in credit in that current account. What the UNC did, decided to draw down on that balance in the current account. By 2012, they had drawn down all of $6 billion in credit. And then the government is entitled by law to run an overdraft. But the overdraft is for what is called temporary advances. The government gets its money in quarters. So for example, at the end of March, this is the end of a quarter, we will get significant revenue. We will get corporation tax, we'll get taxes from the oil companies and so on. But in the months outside of a quarter, for example, in January and February, or in April and May, you don't get that amount of revenue because you get a big amount at the end of the quarter, at the end of December, at the end of March, at the end of June, and at the end of September. So that what the overdraft is intended to do is to carry you through when you're in those lean months, when you're in those months where you don't have the revenues coming in at the end of a quarter. So you draw down on the overdraft, and then you repay the overdraft at the end of the quarter. They didn't do that. They take out the $6 billion in credit we left there, the $6 billion balance, and then they started to draw down on the overdraft and not replenish it. So by the time we came in, the overdraft was up to $9 billion in the negative. So we started off with $6 billion in the positive when PNM left office, and when PNM came back in office, it was $9 billion in the negative. They had drawn out $9 billion. So they draw down 6 and they draw down the next 9. So they took $15 billion out of the government's bank account. Now the overdraft is a percentage of your revenue. So if your revenue is $60 billion, your overdraft is 15% of that, at least it was until recently. So that's how you get the $9 billion. So a government is supposed to have the flexibility. You're not supposed to be in overdraft. PNM didn't have it in overdraft. Supposed to have it there if you have an unplanned expenditure or you have to make an emergency injection of funds into something, or you're in a lean month where you're not getting a bulk of revenue. They didn't treat it so. They treat the overdraft as a loan. $15 billion, you just dissipate just like that. But it didn't stop there. The National Gas Corporation, under the PNM, was a very profitable state corporation. Very profitable. And the National Gas Corporation, over the years, accumulated $15 billion in cash. So the National Gas Corporation had a positive bank balance of $15 billion. You know what they do? They take out all. They leave the National Gas Company with zero. So they take $15 billion in cash out of the National Gas Corporation bank account. They take $15 billion out of the government bank account, that's 30. And then they started to borrow. When they had bled the NGC bank account dry, and they max out the overdraft so you can't get any more money out of the central bank, they start to borrow. And they took our debt from $45 billion to $75 billion in that period. So they borrow next $30 billion. So when you add the $15 billion out of the government bank account, $15 billion out of NGC bank account, and $30 billion in borrowing, $60 billion in what is called unsustainable expenditure. Because you can't sustain that. You max out the overdraft, so you have nothing available there. Anybody who has a credit card or a bank overdraft will understand. Once you reach the limit, that is it. You can't draw out anymore. So that is not sustainable to take the overdraft up to $9 billion. And then they take all the cash out of NGC. So now this government, who is seeking to find new sources of natural gas to rebuild and revive our economy, the NGC does not have the cash available to it to invest in pipeline projects and to invest in gas projects and so on. The NGC will now have to go and borrow. NGC that had $15 billion in cash now had to go into debt because of this government that succeeded us. They just take all the money out of NGC. Reckless. And then, of course, they take the public debt from 45 to 75. What that created for us is a very, very difficult situation. Very, very difficult situation. And then we were faced with all of that. Of course, they were lying all the time. They never told us. You have to reach inside to understand what's going on. So it's when you reach and we see this, we really understand the difficulty that we're in. But it's all right. We were elected to govern, so we go deal with it. So the next lash we get was the collapse of oil prices and gas prices. In 2014, the revenue that the UNC got from oil and gas was $20 billion in 1 year. $20 billion. In 2016, this PNM, from oil and gas, revenue dropped from $20 billion in 2014 to $1 billion in 2016. So not only they max out the overdraft, they raid the NGC, they take out all the money, they send the debt, public debt sky high. We were also faced with a total collapse of revenue from petroleum. And this is a petroleum economy. So we had to deal with it. So one of the things your PNM government did, I mean, we are responsible people. We're not reckless like them. And in any event, all the flexibility and what they call the buffers that we had, they bust it, they gone with it. So we had to start cutting back on expenditure. We had no choice because the revenue from taxation fell from 57 billion total, that's all taxes, oil taxes, taxes from the non-oil sector, value-added tax, customs duty. It fell from 57 billion in 2014-15 to 37 billion last year. So we lost $20 billion in revenue. So we were faced with an economy, a custom running on $60 billion a year, and we have $37 billion in revenue. That can't work. So unfortunately, we had to start pulling back, and we had to start reducing expenditure. And we have been able to bring the public expenditure down from 63 billion down to $50 billion. And we've done that without causing any significant social or policy problems in this country. The country is still functioning. We've managed to do that, to reduce expenditure from 63 billion to 50 billion without causing chaos. Country is still functioning. We managed to keep people in jobs. We also resisted the temptation to do what the pundits told us to do. You know, you have a lot of people that give you advice in this country. Nobody ain't vote for them, you know. They ain't running for no election, you know. They're not accountable to nobody, you know. But they have advice to give you. And if you don't take it, they vex, you know. So, first piece of advice we get is devalue the dollar. Take it 9 to 1, 10 to 1. Sound good, you know. They say once you devalue the dollar, problem solved. But think about it. Where does Trinidad and Tobago get its foreign currency from? From the oil sector. So if the money from the oil sector dry up and you devalue the TT dollar, you're not getting anything. If we were getting 20 billion from the oil sector as they were in 2014, and you do a devaluation, well, you get more TT dollars. You could use that to spend on local goods and services. But when you have no US dollars coming in, because that is what has been happening over the last 2 years, the supply of US dollars from the oil sector, which is the main supply of US dollars to the government, almost 90%, dry up. So devaluing the dollar, what would that have done? It would not give us any additional Trinidad and Tobago dollars. But it get everybody vexed, though. It would cause pressure on the society. It would increase the cost of goods, increase the cost of living for the ordinary man, for the poor man, because we are import society. Most of the goods and services that we use are imported. So imagine if we had taken that advice and listened to them and devalued the dollar to 10 to 1. What will be our position now? But this government took a decision not to do that. We decided to defend the exchange rate. And you know why we did that? We did it for you, the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Because the other problem with devaluation is once you start, you can't stop, you know. You know Jamaica? There was a time when the Jamaican dollar was 2-to-1 to the US dollar, you know. There was a time, you know. I'm sure you could remember that, Minister Can, when you studied in Mona. Higher than 2-to-1, you're telling me now. The Jamaican dollar is now 125-to-1. The Guyanese dollar is 200-to-1. When you start that, you have to be real careful now. It is not to say that we didn't look at it carefully, you know. We took advice. We don't do anything by VAPs in this government, you know. I do advise myself, you know. I go and I get the best possible advice that I can get. And I say that for all members of the government. The best possible advice we could get locally and internationally before we make a decision. And when we looked at it, we say, nah, we will defend the exchange rate. And we will make sure that the cost of living in Trinidad and Tobago remains stable. And you know what is the outcome of that? Inflation has measured somewhere between 2 and 3% per year over the last 2 years under this PNM government. 2%. You know what's the inflation in other countries? Check Venezuela. The Bolivar is now 2,000-to-1, I believe. Or 200,000-to-1. I saw a chart the other day. So we have been very, very prudent and very, very careful about what we did. And I have some news for you tonight. The central bank sent out a bulletin in March, Economic Bulletin, Volume 20, Number 1. And I'm going to read what the central bank said. Now, these are not my words. This is not Imbert saying this. This is the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago, which is a very independent institution. When you look at the Economic Bulletin, the central bank is telling us that there is a slow, this is March 2018, there is a slow but certain turnaround in our domestic economy. An improving growth prospect in the short to medium term. We've had a 13% increase in natural gas production during the third quarter of 2017. Oil production has increased by 4% in the last quarter of last year. The decline in the non-oil sector has slowed to almost 0%. Inflation was 1.3% in the last quarter of 2017. But the most interesting thing in terms of what is going on in our economy, every month I get something called Central Government Fiscal Operations. I'm sent a chart. And this tells me the income that we are collecting and the expenditure that we are incurring. And it gives me details of everything. Taxes from oil companies, other companies, individuals, business levy, customs duty, gambling taxes, royalty, etc. And every year for the last 2 years, I'll be frightened to pick up this because it ain't looking good. Every time I get this document, the income is less than we expected it to be, and the expenditure is more than we expected it to be. And the gap between income and expenditure is much more than we expected it to be. But for the first time in 2.5 years, I'm looking at this document now, and I'm seeing that we projected to receive from other companies, these are companies outside of the oil sector, $1.9 billion for the period October to January, October 2017 to January 2018. We expected to get about $1.91 billion, $903 million. You know what we actually got? $2,535 million. We had an excess over estimates of $631 million from the non-oil sector. When I look at the deficit, which is the difference between what we earn and what we spend, and this is what the rating agencies look at. The rating agencies look at your ability to manage your expenditure in the context of your income. So they look at the deficit, which is the difference between income and expenditure. And we've been running a deficit in this country now for more than 10 years. So the deficit in the first quarter of the year, the deficit was projected to be, based on our estimates for this fiscal year, we had assumed that the deficit, the difference between income and expenditure, would be $1.8 billion. It actually was $228 million. So the gap has dropped by over $1 billion. When we go to October 2017 to January 2018, by this time we were projecting a deficit of almost $4 billion by this time. $3.9 billion was the projection at the difference between income and expenditure. It's only $900 million, ladies and gentlemen. Only $900 million. So I don't want to talk too soon, but things are looking up. Things are looking up. Your government has done its work, and if this trend continues, we can begin to see light at the end of the tunnel in this year, 2018. Now let me turn to something that has been a source of a lot of public discussion, and that is the CLICO situation and what we are doing about that. It's also necessary to give some history with respect to that. In January 2009, officials of the CLICO financial group told the central bank that they were experiencing financial difficulty as a result of the global financial crisis. Shortly after that, after a number of meetings, the government of the day, a PNM government at the time, determined that the financial condition of the CL group of companies posed a danger of damage to the financial system of the whole of Trinidad and Tobago, and came to the conclusion that it was necessary to provide financial support to CLICO Investment Bank, Colonial Life, British American, and all of the subsidiaries of CL Financial. Arising from that situation in January 2009, CL Financial shareholders, Lawrence Dupree and other shareholders of CL Financial, signed a memorandum of understanding with the government. And that allowed the government to start injecting funds into the CL Financial Group and into CLICO to bail out the CLICO Group, the famous CLICO bailout. As a consequence of those agreements, it was decided that the shareholders of the CL Financial Group would be restructured. And an agreement called a shareholders agreement was signed in June 2009. The purpose of that agreement was that a new board of directors will take over the management and control of the assets of CL Financial and ensure that CL Financial would repay government such sums as government shall have expended and invested in furtherance of what is known as the CLICO bailout. So there was a shareholders agreement between the government and CL Financial. The government would bail out CLICO, and as a consequence, the CL group would sell its assets to repay what was essentially taxpayers' money. If we fast forward now to 2015, by the time 2015 came around, that agreement, which was only supposed to last 3 years, had been extended 16 times. So they kept extending it. This is under the former administration. Remember, we went out in May 2010, shortly after this. So under the former government, they kept extending the agreement over and over and over. And the primary objective of the agreement, which was to repay the government such sums as the government expended and invested in the CLICO bailout, was never realized. So for that 5-year period, there was never any repayment to the government. Until my smart predecessor decided he would try to sell some shares in a methanol company owned by CL Financial. And he did so in breach of a shareholders agreement with the foreign partner in that methanol company. And that went into arbitration. And the government was then forced to sell its shares in methanol holdings to the foreign partner, losing $2 billion in the process. Losing $2 billion in the process. The shares were valued at $9 billion. They were forced into arbitration, and they had to sell them for $7 billion. So we came into government, and by that time, the total amount of money expended on the CLICO bailout was in excess of $23 billion. $23 billion of taxpayers' money. And all we had got back was $7 billion. And that was through a forced sale of methanol holdings. It's not that they wanted to do it, The court made them do it. So we started to deal with this because we have financial problems. We have lost $20 billion a year in revenue from oil and gas. We have an uncontrollable expenditure situation where expenditure has gone up to $63 billion. And the government that left that mess for us also gave us a gift. In 2015, in trying to win the election, they decided to give public sector unions very generous wage settlements, resulting in a back pay bill of $5 billion, which they didn't pay. So they went out of office and presented us with that problem to solve. So not only we lose $20 billion in revenue, but we're facing $5 billion in back pay. And of course, unions, they want their money now. Our government signed an agreement, so you have to pay them. Otherwise, trouble. So in the first 2 years, we had to go to the unions, explain to them what the problem was, tell them we go pay them in 2 installments, and we managed somehow in the last 2 years with this crazy financial situation to clear off the back pay and to pay that $5 billion to the public sector unions, to the police, to the prisons, to the army, and so on, and the RHA workers. So we're now faced with this situation where we come in, CL Financial still owes the government in excess of $16 billion of taxpayers' money, and they don't want to pay. They just start to dance us around. And they allowed the shareholders' agreement to expire. And then they say they're not renewing it. And then the next thing we know, they say they're taking back the company. And they say they don't owe us any money. It's no joke, This is what your government was faced with. They owe us $16 billion plus, but they want to take back the company. And, they're arguing about how much money they owe us and so on. So we took the very bold decision to put CL Financial into receivership. And you could imagine, you remember the licks we get for that. We get real licks. And in any event, they say it's madness, we can't get through. Well, we got through. So we have a liquidator inside. So the next story they spread is we're going to sell all the CLICO companies to the famous 1%. We have friends. We're going to sell Angostura to some rich individual. We're going to sell home construction. We go give away Republic Bank. That's the story they start to give us. And there's a little side story inside of there. When we were trying to deal with this situation, because we didn't want to go to court. Court is a last resort. You're never sure to win. So we did not want to go to court and apply to liquidate CL Financial so we could get back taxpayers' money. We decided to have side conversations with people representing CL Financial. And you would not believe the tone and the manner and the, if I'm allowed to say this, the obscene language that we were faced with. And from people that we know well, from people that claim to be members of the PNM, former ministers in the PNM government, always talking on the radio. When we gone to negotiate with Dupré to say, look, we don't want to go to court. We want to settle this thing peacefully. Let us work out our payment plan so that you could pay back the taxpayers the $16 billion that we give to you. We bounce up former ministers of the PNM using the most terrible language, saying to hell with all you. I don't know what they say, but I making it sound nice. To hell with all you. We're taking back the company and to hell with you. That is what we bounce up. People is be talking on the radio and saying them is P&M. But there is a God. So we went to court and we managed to win, and we are now doing an orderly liquidation of CL Financial. And faithful to our covenant with the people of Trinidad and Tobago, let me tell you what we're going to do. You would have heard me mention in the budget that we're going to create a National Investment Fund. Let me explain what this National Investment Fund is all about. And I can tell you tonight that we have selected the expert consultants who are going to assist the Ministry of Finance in establishing this fund, and also in developing what is known as a prospectus, because we're going to make an offer to the public to buy units in this fund. Now, let me explain how this fund will be comprised. Contained within the assets of CLICO, CL, CLICO Investment Bank, and so on, is a substantial percentage of Republic Bank. In fact, 25% of the shareholding of Republic Bank is contained within these companies. So those Republic Bank shares are earmarked to be part of the securities that will underwrite this fund. That's about $5 billion. CLICO also has a substantial shareholding in the West Indian Tobacco Company. Those shares are also earmarked to underwrite this fund. And I'm not sure I should say this, but I'll say it anyhow. CLICO also owns almost 30% of One Caribbean Media, Express and TV6. So we'll put those in the fund too. They also own about 75% of Angostura. So we're looking at ways and means, because when you cross 30% ownership in a company, you trigger the takeover code in the stock exchange. So we have to look at ways and means as to how we can put that 75% of Angostura into this fund, but we'll find a way. So there's 75% of Angostura. We also have a state enterprise which we had earmarked for divestment, Trinidad Generation Unlimited, TGU. We also decided to put shares in TGU into the fund. And there's a methanol company as well called Methanol Holdings International. We're also identifying that company for investment in the fund if it can be done. But let me give you an understanding of what will happen. All of these assets, which total over $10 billion, will be the security for the National Investment Fund, the NIF. And we are going to sell units in that fund to the general public. Let me give you an example of the kind of returns of these companies. Republic Bank currently has a return of 4.3%. Whitco, 6.6%. One Caribbean Media, 6%. TGU is 6%. Methanol International, over 5%. So our intention is to create this fund, put these assets to underwrite the value of the fund, and offer units to the public so you could get this kind of return that we have spoken about. Because right now, if you have a deposit in the bank, you're getting 1%, or 0.5%, or 0%. So this is a way of giving back to the taxpayers. And we are going to price this fund in such a way that you will not lose your investment. There have been some funds set up in the last few years that have lost value. We have no intention of doing that. This government has done 2 successful public offerings since we came in. We did a public offering in First Citizens Bank, and FCB has maintained its value. Investors in that public offering have not lost any money, and they're getting a good return of over 4%. And we did TTNGL. I think we gave away that one, Mr. Khan, because we sold the shares in TTNGL at $20 or $21. And when I looked at it today, it was $28. So those members of the public who invested in TTNGL have done very, very well. They have got almost 30% return on their investment and also getting dividends of about 6%. So we are going to be very, very careful about how we value the units in this fund. And we're going to make sure that when we value them, we'll do it from a long-term perspective to make sure that all that could happen to the units in this fund is the value could go up. We're going to make sure of that, to make it attractive to you, the ordinary people of this country. So you will now own part of Republic Bank, West Indian Tobacco, One Caribbean Media, Trinidad Generation, and Angostura, and so on. So we are giving back all of these assets owned by the CL Group to you, the people of Trinidad and Tobago. The complete opposite of what they said we were going to do. They said we're going to give it away to the rich, to the 1%. We have no intention of doing that. When this government, under Dr. Rowley, says that we're going to do something, we do it. We don't back down. We are not dishonest. This is an extremely committed, genuine, and honest government. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to understand, we expect to have the prospectus out sometime in the month of May, and we expect to close the public offering towards the end of June once everything is successful. And let me tell you how important this is. In this year's budget, even though I've told you our revenue is doing better than we expected and is above our estimates, in this budget, we have to generate at least $4 billion from the sale of assets in this National Investment Fund. So I'm making an appeal to you, the public, tonight. Support your country, support your government, do yourself a favor, and invest in units in the National Investment Fund. And that will allow us, that will give us the revenue to continue providing goods and services to this country and keeping this country running and keep people in jobs. Because our other objective, we had many objectives, not to increase the cost of living, keep it down as low as possible. And also one of our main objectives is to keep people in jobs. And despite a fall off in revenue from 60 to 40, actually from 57 to 37, that's a tremendous drop. That is a drop of over 30%. We have managed to dislocate as few people as possible, a small number of people. There will be issues, of course. There will be people who may suffer some kind of hardship, but we have managed to bring that down to the barest minimum. Look at what we were faced with. $20 billion in revenue gone. Overdraft max out. All the money from NGC disappear. Public debt sky high. So we haven't turned the corner yet, ladies and gentlemen, but I can see light. And I'm not talking about the light there from above the media. I can see light. I can now report to the rating agencies when they come to Trinidad and Tobago. We have Standard & Poor's, that is one of the premier rating agencies that come to Trinidad and Tobago every year and do a credit rating on Trinidad and Tobago and do a commentary on the economy and how the government is managing the economy. I will now be able to report to Standard & Poor's that we are beginning to turn the corner. And for the first time in 3 years, we're beginning to see growth in the economy. And Moody's comes in June. And Moody's not easy, you know. One of the first challenges I had when I was appointed Minister of Finance, a couple of months later, I had to meet with Moody's. Moody's not easy, you know. Moody's come in the room. A young lady of Spanish extraction. Come and watch me. She said, Mr. Imbert, we're going to downgrade your country. I said, well, I just come, who is that? She said, sorry, it's not you, you know. It's the last government. Because if you read our reports for the last 3 to 4 years, we have been telling the government they're engaging in expenditure that is not sustainable, that they're borrowing to the limit, that they're using up all their cash reserves, and they didn't listen. So we're going to downgrade your country. So I said, well, what is this meeting for? She said, sorry, downgrade. And we got downgraded by Standard & Poor's as well. So that was 2016, April. So 2017 come around. They come again. Watch me. Downgrade. I said, what's that? You downgraded us last year? They said, sorry. You're doing some very good work here, but you have to turn this economy around. But we'll do one thing for you. When those credit agencies give our country a rating, they either say you are neutral or negative or stable. They do an outlook on your country. All the outlooks done by the rating agencies for the last several years were negative. And what that meant is they expected the situation to get worse. For the first time in many, many years, last year, even though we got a downgrade, they changed the outlook from negative to stable. So I'm quite hopeful when we meet with Moody's and Standard & Poor's in the next couple of months, we will have some very good news to tell them. We'll be able to tell them that our efforts to contain inflation, to stimulate the economy, to live within our means, to create new expenditure streams, to stimulate the productive sector. In fact, the most productive sector, the oil and gas sector, are bearing fruit. We'll be able to tell them that. And I will be able to tell you, if this trend continues, that by next year, we'll be on a steady growth path. This country will have recovered by 2019. So that is what I wanted to tell you tonight, ladies and gentlemen, that we have turned the corner and I'm seeing the light. Your patience has been worth it. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.